Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes, you can. I'm really glad to be here. I actually spent 10 years of my academic career studying the built environment in Hong Kong. And I was part of the School of Public Health as well in the Institute of Human Performance of the University of Hong Kong. I'm still associated with these universities. So why am I so glad to be here? I'm glad to be here to talk about a study, an international study that is actually shaping public health policy at global level, and to which Hong Kong contributed extremely important data. So I'm a public health researcher, and as such, I'm really interested in promoting health in populations. I do this by trying to find out ways in which we can increase physical activity in populations, because physical inactivity is one of the major causes of premature death. As you see here, almost a quarter of the global population is not sufficiently active to accrue health benefits. And this applies to high-income countries as well as low-income countries. So physical inactivity is a public health concern of global proportions. And we, as public health researchers, need to find ways to increase these levels of inactivity globally. So what can we actually do? We have to find the determinants of this physical inactivity high level of prevalence. In order to do that, it's quite useful to look at changes in physical activity across time in different countries, in developing countries as well as developed countries. As we can see from this table, physical activity has been decreasing across time in all countries. We have an example of 6 countries here. And this is due to decreases in occupational physical activity, in transportation physical activity, as well as domestic physical activity. And the little increases we have seen in leisure time physical activity were not able to compensate for the decreases in the other domains. So we're in Hong Kong, and it makes then sense to look at a bit more closely to data from China. So from 1991 to 2009, you see here, China has witnessed a decrease in transportation physical activity equivalent to 6 minutes of walking for transport per week each year. So in 10 years, this gives you a decrease of 60 minutes. It witnessed a very small increase in leisure time physical activity, but a very large increase in total physical activity, or 2.1 hours of moderate activity per week each year. And that equates to almost 38 hours of moderate activity in 18 years during the period that it was monitored. So these are really strong effects. Now we're asking ourselves, what caused these changes? Has our genetic makeup changed? No, right? Has our psychological makeup changed? No, I don't think so. In 10 years? Possibly not. What has changed? The environment. So we know that broad societal technological developments are believed to have changed the amount of physical activity we put at work, in the household setting and transportation setting. We're really interested in transportation physical activity and leisure time physical activity because these 2 domains are the ones that are most amenable to change. The other ones aren't as easy to change. You know very well what caused decreases in transportation physical activity. We've been hearing about this the whole day yesterday. We know urban sprawl may be responsible, affordability, availability of cars, but also increase in public transportation. The WHO also recognized that the environment is really important. And in 2004, it stated that, as you see here, population-based, multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary, culturally relevant policies were needed to increase physical activity. However, they also called for more research in this field because the evidence, strong evidence, was lacking. So, what happened after 12 years, just 40 days ago, we met at the WHO in Geneva to discuss and draw consensus on the key actions that governments and key partners can take to increase physical activity through what? Through environmental changes. And there were 16 delegates that were not WHO staff. 7 of these delegates were from our study, from our IPEN study, the international study I'm going to talk about today. So why is the WHO interested in us? Why do they seek our opinion? So the IPEN projects were established to address the call from the WHO for stronger, good quality evidence that can inform local policy, but also global policies. In order to find out whether an environmental characteristic is relevant to all countries, leading to global policies, you've got to run a study with common measures, common methodologies across different countries. And that's what we did. So also, by running a study in different countries, we expanded the variability of environmental exposures that we could measure. Because the variability, for example, of dwelling density is quite limited within countries. But when we take many countries and pull together all the data from these countries, we can expand this variability and assess the dose-response relationships or the shape of relationships between, for example, walkability and walking much better and much more accurately. So, for example, here you have an example of a linear relationship between walkability and walking. But maybe we may find out that this relationship is actually curvilinear. But in order to find that out, we've got to have, you know, a great variability of data across different countries. And so, back in 2004, the IPEN projects and IPEN initiative was established by James Salis from the University of California, San Diego, and 2 other colleagues from Belgium and Australia. And I was part of these teams. So they showed that it was possible to run studies across countries using the same methodology that was comparable. So it was feasible. And so they came up with this idea that we could actually expand the network to different other countries. And the idea was that each country would have to find local funding to support the data collection, but also we would try to find to seek funding from the NIH, so National Institute of Health in the US, to support a coordinating center in the US, as well as partially data collection in the different countries taking part in the project. And that's what we did. We got NIH funding, we got local funding to support an IPEN adult study, and we're publishing a lot of papers now on this study. You see, it has been completed. We also got funding to support a study on adolescents. We completed data collection in Hong Kong. And we're actually going to start analyzing the data at the end of this year. And we're seeking funding to do a similar project on older adults. Unfortunately, the NIH didn't support this, but we managed to get funding here in Hong Kong, which is a great thing. So we finished, yes, I'm quite happy about that. We finished the data collection in Hong Kong. We can actually pull data from 3 countries. And I've also heard that recently Brazil got funded for it, and the UK. So we got 5 countries that can contribute data to the senior project. I'm just going to talk briefly about the methodology of our IPEN studies. All IPEN studies are based on recruiting participants from specific communities in the cities that take part in the study. So we recruit participants from communities that vary in socioeconomic status and walkability to maximize the variability in the environmental exposures we're really interested in within country. And then we recruit participants, an equal number of participants from these type of communities. These are the countries that participated in the IPEN adult study. And we got 14,222 participants in our study. So that's quite a large sample. Just to show you how we maximized our environmental exposure, I'll give you an example of high density in Adelaide. What do you say about this? This is what they consider high density in Adelaide. I think it's quite pathetic, actually. But what can you do? So you go further, that's what they consider high density in Ghent. Oh, well, you know, kind of good enough, not really. This is what high density looks like, right? As you're well aware. So by including all these countries in our study, we managed to expand variability in density hugely. And you can see that the dwelling density, net dwelling density in Hong Kong is 30 times greater than that in the US. And also the variability in dwelling density in Hong Kong is massive compared to other countries. So that's why I said that Hong Kong contributed crucial data to the IPEN project. It expanded the variability, you know, at a great extent. So what did we do in our study? First of all, we gave a survey to participants. You know, we're psychologists. We gave survey to participants. We wanted to know something about their perceptions of the environment they lived in, their neighborhood. We used the neighborhood environment walkability scale that we adapted, tested, retested, validated many times in 12 countries to produce comparable scores. This scale measures 10 environmental attributes. I'm going to give you just a few examples. Distance to destinations, perceived safety from crime, perceived traffic safety, pedestrian infrastructure, aesthetics, pollution. So all attributes that we know are quite important for walking. Then we measured the environment also objectively. We geocoded each participant's address, then drew a buffer around the address of 1 kilometer and 500 meters, because we think that these are the areas that can actually the size of the area that can influence participants' behavior. And then we measured dwelling density, access to transportation, a land use mix, for example, street connectivity, and all these attributes we heard about yesterday. Here we have an example of a very low walkable environment in New Zealand and a very high walkable environment in Hong Kong. You see dwelling density is very different. Land use mix, which ranges from 0 to 1, very different. Walkability, very different, from minus 255 to 10.45. So yet again, I'm saying Hong Kong contributed with very important data here. We measured physical activity using self-report, the International Physical Activity questionnaire that was validated in 12 countries. And we also measured it using objective monitors, physical activity monitors. So we gave participants little monitors, you can see them here. They were worn on a belt around the waist for 7 consecutive days, at least 10 hours a day. And 7,273 people actually gave valid data using an accelerometer. That's a huge sample. So I can't talk about all the findings we had in the IPEN, obviously, but I'm just going to give you a sampler. First of all, I said that by expanding environmental variability, we can understand those response relationships between walkability and walking better. Can we? Let's have a look at an example here. These are data from Australia, Adelaide, low-density country. We see that dwelling density is positively and linearly related with walking for transport. Fair enough. What about US? Exactly the same story. Very boring. What about adding Hong Kong to this story? The story becomes totally different. There's a curvilinear relationship between dwelling density and walking for transportation. So we have an increase up to a certain point of density, and then walking for transportation decreases. So that's a different story. What about the generalizability of findings? We said that in order to come up with some good policies that are globally relevant, we need to see whether the relationships hold across different countries. And do they? Well, actually, we tested that using the self-reported data from the new scale and found that 8 out of 10 attributes had similar relationships. I should say they weren't different across countries, across 16 different cities. They had the same relationship. So these findings are generalizable across cultures and across geographical regions, which is very important in terms of policy. We also were able to see how much the environment contributed to physical activity across different countries and different regions in this case. And we saw here, if you look at these first lines here with a dot, with a full circle, they represent the amount of physical activity people do in different countries, moderate to vigorous. Can I get here? Yeah. This one represents the probability of meeting the physical activity guidelines for cancer and weight gain prevention, which means really being active 60 minutes per day. And we can see in Hong Kong, so these are the actual estimates, and the estimates with a triangle are those adjusted for environmental attributes. Basically, are those, if we pretended that every single country and city had the same environmental characteristics. We see that the environment has a positive contribution on physical activity in Hong Kong, quite large actually. It has a positive contribution in Spain as well. While in Stoke-on-Trent, UK, we have a negative contribution on the environment on physical activity. So something's going on there that's not really good for people. But in Hong Kong, the environment actually helps people being more physically active. So what does explain these differences? What is so beneficial in Hong Kong that helps people be more active? First of all, dwelling density, pedestrian infrastructure, crime safety, but also not having many cul-de-sacs, having good access to services, and also having good street connectivity compared to other cities. These are the factors that explain the beneficial effects of the environment on physical activity in Hong Kong. Okay, these are just findings related to the perceived aspect of the environment. What about the objective aspect of the environment, objective measures of the environment? We actually published these findings in The Lancet. And these findings actually attracted a lot of attention, and there were 42 different outlets in Hong Kong that published a summary of our studies. And they were also published in other countries as well, like in Belgium, for example, in Denmark and the US. Why did these findings attract so much attention? They attracted attention because we actually found that living in walkable environments, as opposed to living in less walkable environments, can contribute to the accumulation of 90 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity per week, which equates to the 60% on physical activity guidelines for health. This is a massive contribution. No intervention in public health can give you these effects. They don't give you these effects. So that's why we attracted attention. And so we see that the attributes that mattered the most were net residential density, public transport density, I'll show you here, within 1 kilometer buffer from home, but also public transport density within 500 meters, net residential density within 500 meters, and number of parks contained in the buffer. So these were all important things that contributed independently to physical activity. So how can we explain these findings? Well, obviously, high residential density is associated with better street connectivity, is associated with better access to services. People then, walk more for transportation. We didn't find any association between distance to public transport and physical activity, but we found an association between number of transit stops and physical activity, meaning that if people have more options, they can go elsewhere in the city and picking the right route because of their need, they're going to walk for transport more to get to public transport. Also, when they get off their destination, they're going to walk there because they're not using their car. Obviously, parks, how they can contribute to physical activity. They increase the chances of being physically active through exercise, but they also promote walking due to a better environment in terms of aesthetically pleasing scenery. Now let's go to Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a special case in this study because it has a very humid and tropical climate that makes people less likely to be active. However, Hong Kong had very high levels of activity, and these were due to residential density, having high residential density, having very good access to public transport. And people actually walk and they don't even know they're being physically active. So they walk for daily, errands, purposes, and without even planning. So this is part of their life, and accumulate physical activity across the whole day and across the whole week without even knowing it. So let's go back briefly to the WHO now, meeting that we had. Given the findings we got from the IPEN study, the WHO actually came up with a statement that I explained here, basically stating that urban design should be a globally relevant public health priority. So we're actually working now on documents for member states that outline recommendations for Department of Health, or Public Health, in different countries about what to do to promote physical activity through environmental changes. And obviously, if you want to promote physical activity through environmental changes, we can't just rely on public health professionals. We've got to link up with others. We've got to link up with transportation sector, public urban planning, with architecture, with environmental sustainability groups, and join forces and come up with a strategy that's going to reduce energy consumption, greenhouse gas emissions, air pollution, increase physical activity, and allow us to achieve health and economic benefits. And that's why I'm here. Thank you.